Hello. Welcome, everyone. I'm Bree Hurst. I am your Onspring host today for our webinar, Third-Party Risk Management in an Interconnected Digital World. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items for us to cover quickly. All participant lines have been muted except for our presenters. This session will be recorded and emailed to you all after the conclusion. And we will be taking questions, but at the end of the session. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A part of your webinar on the right side of the screen. We'll also be using the chat feature throughout the course of the presentation. So I think it's always good to warm up the chat before we dive in. So if you guys don't mind testing it out and just maybe put where you're calling in from today. We're here from Kansas City. Nice, Minnesota. Thank you, Andrew. All right. Okay. So our speakers today are Andrew Gunter and Yannick Wenzel from Central. Central is one of Onspring's partners, and we're really excited to have them be part of this or lead this presentation today. And I'm going to hand it over to them. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bree. So as Bree mentioned, my name is Andrew Gunter, and with me is Yannick Wenzel. We are two of the partners at Central. And Central is a consulting firm that specializes in GRC process development, implementation of solutions like Onspring, and running managed services around risk and compliance, as well as provide services to support the Onspring platform. So today, we're here to talk to you about third-party risk management interconnected world. Before we get started, for those that have heard us speak in the past, we always like to start out with a story, a history lesson, or something of the sort. Well, slightly different today is I want to start out with a trivia question. Is that popping up?
Yes, it is.
All right. Sorry, it's not changing on my screen. I'm sorry, everyone. So when you look at this picture, how many trees do you see? Or how many trees are in this picture? And if you can go ahead and type in the chat what you think the answer might be. All right, looks like we have a couple of people responding. So for those that are looking at this, the correct answer is actually just one tree. And it's a little bit of a trick question, so my apologies on that. What it is, this is Pando. It's considered the world's largest organism by mass. It is one giant tree that's interconnected through the root system. Pando is a quaking aspen, and quaking aspen have a unique feature. They can reproduce in one of two ways. The first way is the natural, what we usually consider of a seed is germinated. It floats to the ground or is carried off to someplace. It is planted, and ultimately it will grow into a tree. And that's how they believe Pando was originally created about 10 to 12,000 years ago, so significantly old. The second way is unique to aspen and a couple other creatures in that it can reproduce asexually. And what that means is that as the tree roots begin to expand out from the initial plant, new stems begin to shoot up from the ground. And this happens over time. So over the past 10 to 12,000 years, Pando has slowly expanded to take up over 14.5 to 15 acres in Utah. Now, Pando is on the decline. It's been under attack by some diseases, some different plants. But the biggest culprit right now is it is struggling because of human-introduced cattle that are eating the new stems, as well as mule deer who just love to eat, again, the new stems that begin to grow, and that population has been exploding due to the lack of predators. So why are we talking about Pando today? We're not talking necessarily about risk management when it comes to the natural world, which is important to protect Pando, but more so is when we look at a tree like Pando, we may only see one tree from the outside or multiple trees. That's very similar to an organization that we look at, where you may just see one organization such as Central, but Central is reliant on other third parties and other vendors and other trees that make up how Central operates and how Central runs. So Central, we are what we like to call ourselves almost a cloud consulting company. We only have for resources our people in the laptops they own. Other than that, we are scattered across the United States and stay connected through various technology means. But we rely on Google for our emails, for our data storage. We rely on a cloud service provider for our maintaining our finances. We rely on a cloud CRM. We rely on another third party for helping us select our technology solutions. We use Onspring for some of our legal and compliance matters. We are reliant on other third parties to provide the services to our customers. When there's a risk at one of those organizations, it has a direct impact on us. So let's apply this to a real world scenario. Let me click. I'm sorry, it's not updating on my screen. Yannick, can you confirm that okay.
Yes, it's there.
All right, thank you. So how many of you are familiar with what's happening in this picture? I'm guessing probably everyone has some sort of recognition of what this might be. So this is the Ever Given. It was back in 2021, just last year, the Ever Given was going through the Suez Canal on March 23rd. On that day, a heavy windstorm picked up, causing sand and visibility to block what was going on. Now, a few things about the Ever Given. It is a new class of cargo ships that is over 400 meters long, so a quarter mile long. And the cargo on it can stack 14 stories tall. So when the wind picked up, the Ever Given began to lose control and ultimately slid sideways and got stuck in the Suez Canal, which is only 200 meters wide. Almost instantly, this had ripple effects throughout the world's transportation system. 25% of the ships were impacted globally by this single ship that got stuck. On a given day, any guesses on how many dollars worth of goods go through the Suez Canal? It's about $9 billion or $400 million worth of goods per hour. So when that ship got stuck, it started to impact the supply chain across the world. Kind of give you an idea is 2 days after it was stuck, there were 156 ships waiting to go through. The next day, 237, then 276, 327. And the day it was finally released, it was 367 ships that were trying to get through the Suez Canal that were blocked. Many decided to go take the 10-day trip around South Africa, only to cause even further delay in their goods ultimately being delivered. Third-party risk today, we operate in an ecosystem. We operate based upon our vendors and their risks that are associated with them. When the Suez Canal was blocked, it didn't just impact the owners of the Suez Canal, the owners of that ship, or anyone that had products on board. It impacted every other ship that was waiting to go through and had ripple effects throughout the world. We are entering into what's called the fourth industrial revolution. We are more connected than ever. And Yannick, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what that means?
Thanks, Andrew. And as we talked about the interconnected world, I have one question for you, Andrew. How many times did this happen? The Suez Canal is 150 years old?
Yeah, so it's about 150 years old, and there have been 5 times in its history where it has been closed and over 8 ships that have been stuck. So we're talking about a 1 every 30 years where a ship might get stuck. Now, we expect that as the Suez Canal is working on other plans to start to add other routes and try to prevent this from happening again, but ships are not getting smaller. They're only getting bigger. They're getting wider. Their risk is growing around transportation and going through these canals.
So, guys, why I'm bringing that up is think about the impact and likelihood. Impact and likelihood changed over the years. As we enter the fourth industrial revolution, the impact and likelihood is going to change a lot. And let's maybe just do a quick little bit of going back in history when we talk about the industrial revolutions. There's the first industrial revolution that happened in the 1765, 1840, the mechanical production, the steam engine, railroads. Then we moved on to the 19th and early 20th century where we had electricity, the assembly line. Think about the Model T Ford, where it was mass production. Fast forward to the 1960s to 1990, where we entered into the digital revolution, where we had the development of the semiconductor, mainframe, personal computer, and the internet. And then onward to 2000s, where we start looking into the fourth industrial revolution. The World Economic Forum actually started defining the fourth industrial revolution as the fusion of technologies, their interaction across the physical, biological, and everything is now working together. So think about what this does for our integrated risk world or our integrated world. We have basically two questions that we need to think about now. How are risk for organizations being changed by the fourth industrial revolution and the interconnectivity of the world? Hence our picture of the trees and the Suez Canal. Things just doesn't operate the same. When a ship got stuck 30 years ago, not as major impact on the supply chain as it does today, because everything is just in time working together. Then the second question we have is, do risk management processes need to change in response to this, or do we think they should be okay? Maybe to further illustrate that, let's talk about the tipping points the World Economic Forum put together in 2015. So let's look at some of those. 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet. 80% of people with a digital presence on the internet. The one that scares me a little bit, first AI machine on a corporate board of directors. Or 30% of corporate audits performed by AI. And the percentage that you see on the right-hand side, that's the likelihood of that occurring by 2025. Now let's think about how far-fetched were those things. Are they really that reasonable? 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet. As of this month, any guess on how many sensors are connected to the internet? 29 billion. And that is exponentially growing every month, if not doubling every month. So 2025, 1 trillion, not a big leap. Think about the risk implication of that. There are so many access points that other people can enter into your organization. Just having a sensor that's connecting to the internet in your head office, that could get a jumping point or entry point for a third party. Then 80% of people with a digital presence on the internet. So how many connection points are there then to my organization or to my environment? As of January 2021, any guesses? 59%. Again, let's think about the implications on how this should change. If we start thinking about what this means, is we are living in a digital world that results in digital transformation. So if we start looking at the digital transformation journey, what is it? It's nothing other than technologies that results in the existing business processes, culture, customer experiences that's changing. What does that result in? Cloud-based computing, outsourced processing, change processes. Who on this call does not have any of those? I'm pretty sure almost every single organization that we're dealing with today sits there. And what is this other than third-party risk management? So the question we have is, coming back to that initial two questions, is how can we look at third-party risk management the same way as we did in the past? Does a SOC 2 report still do it? Does a pure questionnaire still do it? Or do we need to think differently on how we manage risk in an ecosystem, so the environment we operate in? Let's think about how that works together. Andrew, you've got a great story for us.
Well, I think as you begin to think about third-party risk management too, it's becoming more and more intertwined with how we view enterprise risk management. Those two concepts are becoming closely knitted because the enterprise risk is so reliant on our third parties. We're not operating in that vacuum, as we have said a few times today. So how we report risk will also need to begin to change in how we view risk. A simple heat map is not going to quite meet it for the stories that we need to tell about how risk can impact us across an organization. Take, for example, this slide here. One of the ways we have started working with our clients, and this actually came from one of our clients, their ideas was viewing risk in the form of a web or an ecosystem. So in the middle of this slide here, you see where it says 15, contagious disease outbreak. And I think it's very, very timely over the last couple of years of where this sits. But the idea behind this view is that if there was a contagious outbreak again, or when it happened, if you had this in your hands in March 2020, what are all the connected risks that may occur downstream? So some of the examples that you might see here are higher than anticipated costs. Cost of goods begin to go up. Supply chains begin to get impacted. Labor shortages. Labor costs begin to increase. Unanticipated unavailability of shared services. Concentration of system-wide locations. Selling of price deflation. The list goes on and on and on, but you can begin to imagine, if you think about your organization, of if you were to go back to 2020 and start to put a little bit of a lens on and say, all right, when a contagious disease outbreak, our fear original one was we're concerned about getting sick or our staff getting sick. But how can that impact the broader organization in other ways that may not become clear? But if you had that view in 2020, what decisions could your leadership make to help address those and actually turn these risks into opportunities as your competitors begin to struggle? And ultimately, I think I'll highlight one more is if you look at the very top of the screen, the line that goes straight up is the ability to pay dividends. All the other risks begin to connect with that one, is that at the end of the day, a contagious disease outbreak can impact our company's ability to pay shareholders, pay bonuses, pay employees. It can lead from one to the other. Yanni, you want to provide a little more context around this too?
Sure. And as Andrew mentioned, this was done by one of our clients in March 2020. So right at the beginning of the pandemic. Now imagine if you have this information at your fingertips at the beginning of a pandemic. It helps position your organization to anticipate what should I be careful about. Negative public perception, negative social media events. If I can anticipate this and work towards anticipating where I should spend my resources, it puts you in a much better position to sustain your organization or even put you in a competitive advantage. And our client was successful throughout these past 2 years because they had the ability to look at this. And that's where we are talking about these risks does not appear in isolation to a specific organization. They are operating, and it's in an ecosystem, whether the ecosystem is my supply chain or I am working together in providing services or widgets to my customers. I use multiple resources in that process. And that gets us to the concept of, well, how should we look at our organization from a maturity point of view? Now you can look at this maturity model from a single organization, and where am I? Am I in a siloed approach where certain processes works in silo to where I integrate all my processes? Or is the bigger view of this, should I look at this maturity in terms of an ecosystem? So all the stakeholders that's together in a supply chain process, from the shipping that manage ships through the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal or critical ports, where I have 4 weeks sitting in a port. So should I work together with my stakeholders in that process to figure out how can I better manage the risk? And that means, do I as an organization operate in a silo? Or do I actually start looking at full processes across organizational borders to manage risks so that I can actually utilize a framework and KPIs, KRIs, to have a fully integrated risk management process in my organization? And we went on to say that's really looking at a transformative risk management process. So not just looking at the silo within my organization, but go much wider. Thinking about that, not all processes or all processes that's related to an ecosystem should be necessarily at the top in transformative. Where am I managing the most risk, and focus on those areas? And make sure I am not in a siloed ecosystem. So think about, I need to deliver goods. So FedEx is part of my ecosystem. Amazon is part of my sales process or part of my procurement process. And organizations, therefore, are oftentimes in multiple ecosystems. So, and how do I manage that?
So Yanni, would you say that many organizations have hit that transformative level yet, or where would you say you see a lot of organizations sit on this chart?
So great question, Andrew. And I think there's actually two parts to that question. I would say if we look at where business in our organization, so the people that's running my business day to day in my organization, they're already in that transformative environment. They have no choice. That's the way they operate. But us as risk practitioners are oftentimes more in the traditional, at best, we're on the integrated risk side. So we're looking at risk in our organization. We obtain a SOC report. We obtain maybe a third-party risk questionnaire. And if we're really advanced, we make a phone call or do a site visit. But are we really thinking about how do we proactively managing risk across my organizational borders? And this is the call for us to action, to actually start thinking about how can we as risk practitioners meet business where they are and start working with business to manage and mitigate risk appropriately and proactively looking at where are the risks. So go ahead, Andrew.
I was just asked, did the slide flip to you for you?
That's great. And guys, if we start thinking about how to approach a transformative risk or a new view of how we look at risk in an ecosystem, we start at the top looking at governance. How do I proactively starting to manage my risk across different organizational borders? The management of that, and I use the concept managed services, and that's not saying, oh, you need to go and hire a managed services. It's how do you manage risks together as an ecosystem? And there's a couple of things that we highlight and suggest people start thinking about. From a foundational getting ready, start looking at what are the processes that goes across organizational borders. Understand and identify the participants that should go and work together in managing those risks. So set up a governance structure, a way to manage these risks, and then develop a roadmap to actually formalize and look at what these processes are. Business is already there. How are we as risk management going to keep up and catch up and meet business where they are day-to-day working? With that roadmap, understand on how are we going to enable this? Do we need to implement software? Do we need to implement real-time monitoring processes, KPIs, KRIs? And look at those and work together to support and enable those processes. This is not a quick check the box, we're done. This is a real-time working with business to get there so that we can actually manage and sustain and execute the processes. Think about, do I need a SOC 2 report? And how am I going to work with that SOC 2 report to make that continuous real-time managing of risk instead of a historical looking back?
And I think this is where a software solution like Onspring can really come in to help assist with this. Because what this is requiring is more data aggregation, more data relationships than you can really manage when it comes to using an Excel spreadsheet or just basic Word, PowerPoint. When you think of all those tools that you have at your disposal, having that relational database and be able to provide real-time metrics that's where a tool like Onspring can really provide that value. And when it comes to sustaining it, when we think about going back to that risk in the ecosystem slide, where we begin to point to downstream risks, you can do something like that in a technology solution where you can begin to show that if this risk were to occur, what are the downstream impacts and how we quickly adopt those and address those and put mitigation plans to start addressing those. Using a tool allows you to speed up that process, particularly when you need to make quick decisions or provide reporting to leadership. The advantage that you have with a tool versus trying to do it manually is resources are not necessarily growing when it comes to risk management. It's tough to get additional people. It's tough to find individuals. Having a software tool that can help manage and help limit the amount of people that you need to add to your team to manage all this risk in an interconnected world would be really important to help make your program as streamlined and as efficient as possible.
So, Andrew, that is so true. And I think what we as organizations need to realize, it takes this out of our risk management comfort zones to actually work with business and start proactively managing with business the risks. And for those of you that heard our presentation on streamlining GRC, one of the mantras we keep on using there is meet business where business is, instead of trying to get business to be risk practitioners. We need to work with business. If we look at the bottom side part of this slide, it talks about integrated risk. So the old, and I use old in quotes, integrated risk management processes, where we in an organization want to integrate our risk management processes. What we're saying is we need to start looking wider. Technology is changing. We are introducing new areas, hence the 25 tipping points that we talked about. Start thinking about, if I look at segregation of duties, business continuity, compliance management, don't look at those things just in my organization, look wider. This, guys, is a journey that we start on. And my call to action for all of us is, let's start working together on that journey. Start thinking about who are the stakeholders, which ecosystems am I operating in? To quote Winston Churchill, he says, success is not final. So once we've established that, we're not successful. And he also goes on and say, failure is not fatal, because we're not going to be successful all the time. We're probably going to have a ransomware attack or something else going to go wrong. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I think that is important for us to realize as we go forward in this journey with third party. The world is changing faster than us. And we want to make sure, as Winston Churchill said in 1946, when he talked about his school career, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's courage that to continue that counts. We will experience success and failure in this journey. Let's keep on pushing forward to keep the forest alive or the ecosystem alive.
Thank you, Yanni. So wanted to open up for any questions that people might have. And there's Bree.
Any questions from the group? So I have one question. When you guys were on that last slide showing, getting to transformative risk, a lot of the clients that I work with are always having questions around how do I get started? And I think this is a really good visual representation of what that journey can look like. Can you guys just speak a little bit more to maybe folks that are in that place of knowing that this is something that they want to get started at their organizations, and just give a couple anecdotes maybe of how you see organizations start out on this journey?
Yeah, I can provide a few thoughts on that. And Yanni, feel free to chime in. When I always say, whenever it comes to starting this journey, it's always a process and people first approach. Understand your processes, identify the people, and then technology can help support that and enable that. And with that comes is this concept of, I highly encourage all my clients is go through a roadmap exercise. And that's not just necessarily an implementation roadmap, but it is, what will it take for you to hit your targeted goal? Whether you're just trying to get to the stage of getting a third-party risk management off the ground or ERM off the ground, or we're looking for an integrated risk management model. What are the steps that are going to take you there? Identify all the stakeholders, identify those processes that need to be included in it, and begin to build out how that will be interconnected. It's a roadmap in and of itself is not a 1 day, 2 day exercise to develop. It can take weeks, months to really get that defined and get everyone's stakeholder buy-in on it. But once you have that, you have the vision of what you're trying to achieve, you've created that North Star of where you're going. And that's something that you can continue to go back to time and time again. And that way, when it comes time to actually build everything out, implement a solution, bring in Onspring, you're at a spot that you're so much further along that the actual implementation and the build out process will go significantly smoother. Yanni, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I will add a quote from one of our clients. I did a joint presentation with him, and the audience asked that exact same question. And he started with, meet the business where the business is. So start working with the business. Identify who are the people in your own organization that's part of that process. Work with them and understand how they operate. That way we will understand better how the ecosystem operates. And that, I think, to what Andrew said, I did understand the stakeholders, who they are, meet the business where the business is. A big mantra we as risk practitioners should take on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one other question. What are the common hurdles that you all see organizations facing as they are on their journey to transformative risk?
Yeah, go ahead, Yanni. It looks like you have one ready.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is a change management challenge for us as a practitioner. We are very conservative. We want to keep things within an organization. We want to keep things for ourselves because we need to protect our organization. What we need to realize is the change is coming that we now need to protect the ecosystem. So get over that first hurdle of trying to keep everything within an organization, as third-party risk management goes across organizational borders.
And one thing I would add to that in a little bit different vein is whenever you're bringing in third-party risk management, ERM, or trying to roll out a risk compliance process, new technology, whatever you be, there is a resistance to change. And it's a lot of times bringing one of these solutions is more about change management than anything else. And what we apply is this principle that was come up with by a man by the name of Raymond Loewy. He was an industrial designer from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And his principle was called the Maya principle, the most advanced yet acceptable. And what that means is that people want the most advanced product that they can have, but they're only willing to accept so much change at any given point in time. And if you cross that threshold of too much change at one time, it will be the product, the service, whatever it is, will be rejected, and people will go back to their old ways. So new and better is not always going to be adopted. It's a matter of taking a metered approach, and this goes back to that roadmap concept: is how can you build out a program in a metered fashion that can continue to be changed, that can continue to be accepted, and that's driving towards that overall vision.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right. Well, Andrew, Yanni, thank you so much for sharing your risk management expertise with all of us. Folks on the line, if just so you know, the session has been recorded and we will send the recording out to you all. If you're interested in learning more about managing risk with Onspring and would like to set up a demonstration, reach out and we're happy to schedule that for you. All right. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone.